joining us this evening. So we're going to go through a whole lot of technical content related to LEED v4. Feel free to interrupt me at any time as I'm going through the slides. We're going to focus mainly on design and construction, and then I'll talk a little bit about existing buildings throughout as we go through. If I'm missing something, if you have a question, just feel free, shout out, raise your hand. I was telling Karen when she first walked in, I've given this presentation several times this week, so I need to just break the monotony for me a little bit, so don't be afraid to interrupt. Let's see, are you working? Yes. All right. As was mentioned, this course has been approved for 1.5 general building design, interior design, and EBOM specific hours. There is a GBCI approved course number for this presentation. We have given it to the chapter. If you have questions about it, we can send a follow-up email afterward with how you can report the course for your LEED specific hours. So in terms of LEED version 4, what is it? It's everything you know about LEED. We are updating the entire program, and it's important to really take this into account and kind of understand what's been going on over the course of the past 4 years since we've started development of this program. So we've been public for the last 3 years about our rating system development through our public comment periods. The chapters have developed regional priority credits. You may have tested some of the pilot credits for version 4 on your current projects. We haven't been so public about our reference guide development, our education, documentation, LEED Online. That all changed about a year ago when we made the decision to delay our ballot vote 1 year for the program and essentially engage our stakeholders in a beta of the LEED version 4 program. So over the past year, we've developed the content for all of these components, and we've at this point engaged over 90 projects in working toward certification through LEED version 4. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the important thing to note here is we've been doing a thorough vetting of all of the components of V4. Most notably, the things you may have seen most often is likely the rating system, but lots else going into that as well. There we go. So a couple of weeks ago, we closed our 6th public comment period, an unprecedented number of comment periods for any version of LEED that we've developed. We've received and responded to over 22,000 public comments, and as I mentioned, over 90 projects are currently enrolled using LEED v4, working toward their certification. April is a very important month for us. For those of you who are employed by USGBC national member companies, you do have the option to register to vote this month. If you would like to vote in our ballot, which is scheduled for June, the process that we must go through to actually approve the rating system, you have until the end of this month to register. I have the short link toward the end of the presentation. The other pieces of the program, as I mentioned, all of our commercial forms are through their initial development. Our beta projects are using them. They will be in final form in June. Our reference guide content has been in development for a little over a year. It is going into copy edit and layout over the course of the next few weeks. And our education content is in the process of being developed, the first 2 series of which will launch at the close of ballot in July. So to get into the program, one of the central components of the LEED version 4 update is the idea that LEED is a global system. So as of this year, LEED is actually used in well over 140 countries around the world. And every day, the GBCI certifies over 1.6 million square feet of space to LEED. So what this means from a rating system development perspective is the version of LEED that we're putting out to the market needs to be a globally relevant rating system that's serving as a global standard for green building everywhere in the world. What does that translate to in terms of our development? Some really simple things. You'll see that there are now metric and imperial units in the rating system. Some more examples that are globally relevant across the rating systems, and then some more sophisticated changes, if you will. So we have a lot more reference standards that are relevant to projects outside the US, but also a lot more flexibility for projects no matter where they are, whether they're inside or outside the US. We leave a lot of room for local or regional equivalents that are equally or more stringent than something we're referencing in the system. That's important to California. You all have many more progressive energy codes than what we tend to reference in LEED. We want to make that as streamlined as possible for you all. So if something is, if something that you're using in your locality, in your state, is equally or more stringent than what we're referencing, you can simply document it through your path and just comply with the path that you're used to, as opposed to having to redocument something simply because it's what LEED references. So we're integrating a lot of that streamlining throughout the rating system, and a lot of it has come from the global work and the global approach that we've taken to the system. In addition to that 1.6 million square feet that we're certifying every day, in addition to it being much more far-reaching around the world, it's also very different in terms of the types of projects that we're seeing come through. So LEED is not just used by the typical commercial offices anymore. We're seeing data centers, healthcare facilities, existing schools, all sorts of different use types trying to use the rating system as a tool for their market sector to achieve sustainability. So what we did back in 2009, we stood up a number of working groups in these different market sectors. These groups were providing us with a lot of demand in terms of wanting to adjust the rating system to address issues that they were having with really effectively using LEED in their market sector. So data centers, for example, very low occupancy, very high energy usage. There's a couple of key issues that need to be addressed in order for data centers to effectively really use LEED as a tool. So for each of these market adaptations, you'll see in V4 about 3 to 7 changes in the system specific to each of these sectors. We asked those working groups to really prioritize the key issues that were really keeping them out of effectively using the system. What we found already since we launched the beta program, we have a number of data centers projects participating, which is showing us a couple of key things. One, LEED 2009 still isn't a very effective tool for them, even with guidance that we've put out there subsequent to its launch. And two, that what we are providing in V4 really is something that works. We've also seen a lot of warehouses finding and giving us feedback that some of the V4 specific paths are really making a difference for them in terms of understanding and applying the requirements appropriately. Just to touch on LEED for neighborhood development, we've also learned through our pilot program that we had a couple years back that we need an additional certification point at the plan stage, just based on the timeline that an ND project uses. So we've added a certification point at the plan phase, and then we also have the neighborhood development project certification. So this makes 21 rating systems that LEED version 4 supports, which is significantly more than 2009. Anyone here regularly use EBOM? Just a couple? So we've simplified the structure of the existing buildings rating system in order to very clearly articulate what is an initial certification requirement versus what is an ongoing or recertification requirement. So for those of you who are not familiar with the existing buildings rating system, it has always had a recertification component associated with it. The EBOM certifications are valid for 5 years, and the project needs to comply with recertification requirements in order to maintain that certification over time. We've never been really clear about what those recertification requirements are. And as we're seeing the initial projects come through that's certified about 5 years ago, they're actually doing a lot more work than they needed to and are essentially preparing to come through existing building certification all over again. That's not actually necessary. So what we've done is we've clarified the requirements that fall into establishment or things that you do the first time, along with performance requirements that are actions, performance tracking, along key indicators. So you do all of this the first time, and then you only need to show us and report to USGBC in your recertification on your performance requirements. So it knocks out a whole lot of administrative work for the project team for that ongoing certification. So, so far we are finding that this is also proving to be a very helpful, streamlined path for our projects. For those of you who use the residential rating systems, we've also pulled those programs into this LEED version 4 update. So they have joined the commercial continuous improvement cycle. Homes was not really part of the LEED 2009 launch. It's now part of this, this update process. We've also re-weighted the homes rating system to 100 points like commercial and adjusted the certification thresholds like we did in LEED 2009 to 40, 50, 60, and 80. We are balloting the mid-rise rating system for residential projects, multifamily residential projects that are between 4 and 6 stories. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but following what's mandatory in the commercial rating systems, we have the mandatory requirements for water and energy metering. The energy performance requirements, we're relying on Energy Star V3. And then we've done a lot of documentation simplification for the materials and indoor environmental quality sections. So now this is the major component of the V4 update, the idea of improved environmental outcomes associated with the rating system. So we have several goals for LEED development for USGBC. As a mission-driven organization, we want to combat buildings' contribution to climate change. We want to enhance human health as it pertains to the impact that the built environment has on it. We want to protect water, protect biodiversity. There's a whole host of goals that we have. And the way that we essentially get there is by pulling the market along through increasing the technical rigor of our credits. So that's really the main change that you see in version 4, what we're going to spend the most time on tonight. And it is so important that as we're on this continuous improvement cycle, we're kind of balancing that technical and environmental urgency with needing to push the market further along, and of course balancing that with what the market can absorb in one version update. So to start, as I mentioned, this is BD&C and ID&C specific, and I'll throw in some EBOM as we go along. The first new concept and credit that we have in the LEED version 4 rating system is an integrative process credit. So LEED has always been a very good tool to incentivize an integrative process. It sort of lends itself very well to that process. It's never been something that we've directly rewarded. We've changed that with LEED version 4. We are rewarding project teams for doing an early analysis of their energy and water systems and helping USGBC and GBCI to understand how that analysis influences their design and actually influences what the owner wants, and kind of marrying those owner goals with what the design team is doing. So we've done a lot of work on this credit. We got a lot of feedback through our public comment process that this credit had a very high potential for being administrative and burdensome to project teams in a very LEED specific way, a lot of LEED homework, if you will. And so we worked very hard on creating a worksheet that guides a project through, just question-based, guiding a project through their energy analysis and their water analysis, and helping us to understand how their ideas or their goals changed and were impacted by the information they were getting. And then, of course, having providing us with the simple box energy model summary results that are part of the energy requirements. We also have a new credit category in LEED version 4, location and transportation. Not a new concept. You'll recognize the vast majority of the credits. We've essentially split out the location and the sites credits so that these credits that fall into the LT category are more specifically about the relationship between building occupants and the community surrounding them, and encouraging projects to really consider what is the surrounding community context of the building where I'm choosing to locate, or of this location? What are the potential benefits that my occupants can have by locating here as opposed to someplace else? The building design and construction rating systems have not historically served as a good tool for impacting location-based decisions, and so we're hoping that with the changes we made back in LEED 2009, by giving those credits more points because of their carbon reduction potential, and now kind of highlighting them on their own, we're hoping to kind of build that prominence as we go along. So what you see on the screen now, this is just a graphic representation of what happened with location-based credits from LEED 2009 to LEED version 4. So you'll see, well, what you'll see as we go through is that this is relatively minor change compared to some of the other categories. Red being more of a major change, yellow relatively minor compared to other credits in the system, and then green, which there will be green credits, I promise, is relatively low level of change, or maybe we just added some options. So to walk through each of these credits, the first one in the rating system is a reward for locating in a LEED for neighborhood development location. So a project team will either earn this credit and ignore the rest of the credits in the category, or they will ignore this one and go with credits 2 through 8. So if you have a LEED ND location that you are able to locate in, we want to provide projects with a streamlined documentation path, and essentially noting that they are in a LEED ND location, providing us with that project ID number, certification level. Depending on the project certification level, the BD&C or ID&C project can earn up to all of the points in the LT section without having to go through and document each credit individually. If you're not near or don't want to consider a LEED ND location, it's fine. You simply skip number 1 and go to credits 2 through 8. The points are equaled out. You're not leaving them behind. So the first of the credits that you would earn, or that you could earn if you were skipping that LEED ND streamlined path, is called sensitive land protection. So this is an outgrowth of the site selection credit that you're all familiar with from LEED 2009. The way that this credit is currently structured in LEED 2009, it rewards projects for avoiding any type of protected land, so wetlands, water bodies, prime farmland. What we find that this credit does is, of course, reward projects that aren't locating in those areas, but what it doesn't do is help us to ensure that for projects that are located in some type of protected area, that the project is employing some sort of best management practice on the site to ensure that that protected area actually remains protected in some way. So we've added an option to this credit. In addition to avoiding those protected lands, we have additional requirements for if you are on some sort of protected land, you can earn points by employing a number of best management practices for that type of site. So prime farmland has somewhat different requirements than, of course, being near a wetland or a water body, but we wanted to be sure that we were providing project teams with the tools to actually have a positive impact on a site regardless of where that site is. The next credit is called High Priority Site. You will recognize the brownfields redevelopment requirements that are in here. We've also added an option to the credit for locating in some sort of area that has been flagged for economic reinvestment. So it may be an economic empowerment zone, a federal weed to seed program, anything that is encouraging buildings or projects in the local or regional context to reinvest in certain areas based on the infrastructure that's already there. We want to piggyback on that local or regional promotion of certain areas and reward LEED projects for choosing sites in that area. The next credit is surrounding density and diverse uses. Here we've allowed projects to earn either density or diverse uses or both, slight change from 2009. And then we have modified the density levels a little bit to reward different entry points of density for the requirements. The quality transit credit is a really good example of making the credits in LEED version 4 more performance-based. So in this case, and really in the context of location and transportation, Better performance means that we're implementing requirements where there's a better guarantee that occupants are going to essentially behave the way we expect them to. So if you're locating near public transportation, the expectation is you can assume a carbon reduction associated with your building's transportation because more of your occupants are using that service. If within the quarter-mile radius between your building and the public transportation is a highway and none of your occupants can get there, it doesn't really help that you're somewhat close to it because there's not an accessible route to it. So we've done a couple of things to put this credit on a trajectory to be more performance-based and outcome-oriented. One, we've switched the metric from to trip count on both weekdays and weekends, since trip frequency is one of the best indicators of when an occupant or when a person will choose to use public transit. And then second, we've moved from radius to a quarter-mile walk distance to start to get at that aspect of the next indicator down from trip frequency is the quality of the route between a building and transit, or where a person is in transit. So we want to start to really get at those indicators and help projects consider what the surrounding context of their building is and what that means for how their occupants will actually behave in terms of transportation behavior. One of the first major changes to the system is the bicycle facilities credit. So everyone kind of knows this credit as the one that people love to laugh at USGBC for. It's a point for bike racks and shower rooms where we see pictures of mops and buckets shoved in there because no one uses the showers, because no one can bike to the site. So it's kind of the same idea as the quality transit credit. Without really considering the context around a project, having bike racks and shower rooms doesn't really matter. So we took a hard look at this credit because it's important to USGBC. I'm one of many avid cyclists who bikes to work every day. Doesn't matter how cold it is. We want this credit to work. It's something that is near and dear to all of our hearts. So we took a good look at this and added a requirement that essentially says, in addition to providing storage and shower rooms, the project must also be located within proximity to a bike network in order to earn these points. So a bike network could be bike lanes surrounding the site, bike trails, roads that have they're under a certain miles per hour, they're actually more bikeable, and that they're connected to services around the community. So the point being, in order to earn this credit, we want projects to really be considering, is my building in a place where biking, as opposed to driving or some other way of getting to my building, is possible? And if not, is it something we'd want to consider actually changing that and selecting a building or selecting a site where maybe that's a possibility? So for that, we've added those requirements. The reduced parking footprint credit, it's more of a major change. We've changed this credit up quite a bit, so you cannot earn the credit anymore through simply not adding any new parking. We're now looking at the Institute for Transportation Engineers Transportation Planning Handbook, and the way that the requirements work is essentially projects need to specify a number of spaces that often fall below a local or regional code. And so projects may find that they need to obtain a variance from their local zoning board in order to meet the requirements of this credit. This is definitely one that we're watching very closely with our beta projects to see how truly actionable it is. It's great in theory, but we want to make sure that it is something that's actually driving behavior for our LEED projects. So we will continue to watch this one closely. The last credit in the location and transportation section is the green vehicles credit. So here it's preferred parking for 3% of all spaces. We've also added a requirement for 2% of spaces having refueling stations for electric vehicle charging. For the EBOM rating system, there's one credit in that category, just called alternative transportation. It's a performance-based credit looking at your occupants' transportation behavior. The credit is worth up to 15 points. The first point you can earn simply for conducting your transportation survey, and then you can earn up to the rest of the 15 points based on the results of the occupant surveys. Questions on LT? That was really fast and a lot of stuff before I move on to sites.
The last 15 points you said, was that ID? I'm sorry.
Oh, that was EBOM. So in the EBOM rating system, they just have one credit that's based on their transportation behavior. Yeah?
Are they, for that, trying to get a variance for below required parking, have they taken into consideration the cost of a variance? Location of the city?
So that was something that the location, our volunteer group of location technical experts discussed a lot. And we went back and forth on that credit quite a bit, especially, so we have our technical advisory groups who are proposing technical language, and then one of our other committees is called the Market Advisory Committee. They're another group of volunteer experts who focus more on making sure that we're not kind of pushing things too far. And that was always kind of a conversation point over the last several years of really, are we making that credit inactionable, potentially, one, because of cost of obtaining a variance, two, just thinking in terms of, okay, we understand the process, at least in the US, that a project would go through, but how does this apply globally? And is it a completely different or impossible process outside the US? So that is one really, again, where we're going to pay close attention to it with the projects we have using V4 now. It may be one where we see some options added as alternative compliance paths at a later date to make it resonate a little bit more with project teams, because I think that's one that we're finding isn't quite where it can be to be as optimal as possible. Yeah?
So Chrissy, going off of that, how will that work then if you determine that credit's not working for the 90 projects that you've got, given that you're going to go through the ballot phase by July?
So the way that, typically the way that we do maintenance to the rating system, one of the options is an alternative compliance path. And so those are available for us to approve at any time. So if we find that just simply no one earns it, it's not worth their time, it's just not possible in a lot of places, we would simply add an option that would provide a different avenue or address different requirements. So projects would always have the option of pursuing that path. We wouldn't take it away, but we would add more paths that the project could follow. Anything else in this category? All right. So now that we have pulled out the location-based credits from the sites section, the sustainable sites category is really about the relationship now between the building and the ecosystem on site and the services that are provided by the site. The idea here, when we think of improved performance from a site's perspective, is being able to rely as much as possible on the ecosystem services on site and really disrupt and change the site as little as possible. So one of the main ways we'll do that, as you see, of course, with through all of the credits that now remain in the site section, but notably through the site assessment credit that I'll talk about in a moment. You'll see relative to other categories, again, this is mostly minor changes compared to the other sections, and then we do have the one new credit for site assessment. So the first prerequisite in LEED version 4 is construction activity pollution prevention. Again, you are all familiar. We've simply updated the EPA reference from the 2003 version of the general permit to the 2010 version. The first new credit here is for site assessment. So this is essentially the integrative process credit from a site's perspective. So we want that early design and analysis and questioning of the site in terms of constraints, opportunities, unique needs, owners' goals, as it pertains to climate, hydrology, soils, habitat use. So what we expect this credit to do is not only help the project rely more on those on-site ecosystem services, but also help the project better achieve the other sites credits in the category. We've added an option to the Protect or Restore Habitat, in this case in the BD&C systems and in EBOM, for projects that want to make a financial donation to a nationally accredited Land Trust Alliance or land preservation organization to preserve large tracts of land. The reason for this, of course, is because preserving larger tracts of land and habitat can often be a better outcome and do a better job of protecting habitat than doing it in more of a piecemeal way on a project-by-project basis. So we've been working for quite a number of years with the Nature Conservancy and other organizations to make this an actionable option. And we're seeing a lot of support for it, and so far it seems to be working quite well. One of the changes we did make in 6th public comment, I think, was add a phrase that we'll talk about a little bit later called or USGBC approved equivalent to that nationally accredited Land Trust Alliance clause. And what we mean by that is essentially if there's a local program or a program outside the US that meets the intent, they just may not be nationally accredited. We want to leave room for projects to be able to engage with those organizations as well. So if there are other land preservation organizations in your area that you want to support, you can simply ask that question and we can go through that evaluation process. There was one other thing I wanted to say about this. Oh, the way that the donation works is you make it through an accredited organization and it goes toward preserving land in the project's US EPA ecoregion. So it's not just kind of sending money off to you're not sure where and what it's doing. It is actually preserving local land.
What if there isn't really local land?
Mm-hmm. I think based on our conversations with the Nature Conservancy, there's in basically every ecoregion, there's something, yeah. And then as it pertains to outside the U.S., it's a little bit different with there's not as much land preservation infrastructure. In that case, you would just follow the option that you're used to, which is the first one to protect land on site. Mm-hmm. Minor changes to the open space credit. We've added a qualification here that the open space must be of some sort of beneficial use to either your building occupants or the community if you're giving community access to that space. And then we've made some further clarifications for turf grass as well as vegetated roofs. We've combined both of the stormwater management credits into one rainwater management credit that's more holistically looking at rainwater as a resource. So here we're going to all the way up to the 98th percentile rainfall event, which includes the high frequency, low impact events in addition to the low frequency, high impact events. Again, recognizing rainwater as a resource and something that can serve your site. And then we have another option that we've added for zero lot line projects to help make the requirements a little bit more clear for them. What we've found with this credit, by combining them, relying on low impact development, best management practices, we've been able to pretty significantly reduce the documentation associated with this credit. So we do expect to see credit achievement go up here because the LEED homework is going down, even though it's a more technically rigorous credit. The same is true for heat island reduction. Here again, we've combined the roof and non-roof credits into one credit with two options where you can earn either one or both. We've adjusted the metric for paved materials from SRI to SR. So for paved materials, LEED projects were just kind of conducting an extra calculation for LEED purposes, and by relying on solar reflectance, there's fewer calculations that the project will have to do. We've also increased the threshold for parking spaces undercover in order to comply with the credit. What I consider to be sort of the Cinderella story of the site section and maybe the entire LEED version 4 update is the light pollution reduction credit. This is one of the least often achieved credits in any version of LEED. It's complex. There's a lot of documentation that just kind of goes over a lot of people's heads. You need a lighting consultant. It's a lot of work for one point, and so very, very few projects achieve this credit, and even, not very many more attempt them, but there's a lot of times when the credit is denied as well. So one of the things we've done, since we're now relying on ASHRAE 90.1 2010 that has mandatory requirements for interior lighting that was previously covered here, we've taken out the interior lighting requirements, and we've added an option that's calculation based using the BUG rating system. BUG stands for backlight, uplight, and glare. So 3 of the key components of how you rate lighting. So the way it works, you calculate your lighting zones on site, and then you just simply specify lighting fixtures based on your lighting zone that have certain BUG ratings. That's all you do. There's no photometric site plan, no complex calculations. It's far easier than it used to be. This is one of the credits where, again, we've been able to increase the technical stringency. It's far more rigorous, but it's much easier to document and to just show us that you've complied. So this is one of those credits where beta projects, we've already been hearing great things from them that they're actually able to achieve it. So this is a really good story. So our approach to water efficiency, thinking back again to that 1.6 million square feet of space that we certify every day, as I mentioned, it's not the typical commercial office space anymore. And in addition to those unique project types, we have a lot of unique water uses that were not typical 8 years ago when projects were using LEED. The main water uses were the fixtures and fittings and the landscape water, and that was the dominant water use. Now with schools, with healthcare, retail, data centers, we're seeing all sorts of different water uses that have far more of an impact on a project's overall water use than their fixtures and fittings and their landscape water. So we now address total water use in LEED version 4, and we much more appropriately provide the right kind of incentive for projects to address the water that means the most to them in terms of potential to reduce their water use. So starting to see a little bit more red here. We've added some prerequisites and added a couple of credits to more fully build out this category. And it's worth mentioning we've moved the innovative wastewater techniques credit to the pilot credit library. This is another very infrequently achieved credit. And when projects do achieve it, they would most often do so through additional water efficiency and not through actual innovative wastewater strategies. So we've kept it in the LEED for Neighborhood Development rating system because it seems to work better at the community scale, and we're continuing to kick it around in the pilot credit library for the single building context until we get something that really works. So here we've added a new prerequisite for outdoor water use reduction. We're relying on the EPA's WaterSense water budget tool, so projects need to show a 30% reduction in their outdoor water use based on a calculated baseline number, or simply comply with the prerequisite by having no irrigation on site. For the indoor water use reduction prerequisite for eligible fixtures, we have the WaterSense label required. And then this is where you'll start to see some of those appliance and process water requirements specific to the projects where it's most relevant. So healthcare, retail, schools, and hospitality. We've added a new prerequisite for building level water metering. You'll see a similar change on the energy side. This is true of BD&C and EBOM rating systems as well as residential. So each project needs to be, each building needs to be capable of measuring their whole building water use. And so in a campus application, does anyone use campus here? Just a couple? So in the campus application, each building on the campus that's going through certification would need to have that building level meter. The first credit in the water category is outdoor water use reduction. So again, we're looking at the EPA's WaterSense water budget tool. This time to start earning points, the thresholds are at 50% or higher. Yep, this one or a different one?
Is that total water use or potable water use?
For outdoor?
Yeah.
I believe it is still potable water use. I
so
think.
projects can still achieve this if they're using reclaimed water?
I believe so. But I will check for sure. Because no, it's fine because I'm not entirely sure. I do need to check on that, but I believe it's potable water use. And again, there's the option to earn the credit for not having any irrigation. So another kind of streamlined path to earning those points. The next credit, indoor water use reduction, worth in some cases some more points than it was in LEED 2009. Here again, we have the WaterSense label required for eligible fixtures, and there are some appliance and process water requirements here. And then we've added additional thresholds for achievement to account for some of the points that are in that credit. One of the first new credits in the water category is the cooling tower water credit. So this is a water efficiency based credit that focuses on maximizing the cycles of concentration that you're using in a cooling tower. So essentially based on the chemical makeup of your water, you can recycle and reuse that water in a cooling tower up to a certain amount of time when the water reaches a certain concentration of chemicals. So we want those cycles maximized in order to use the least amount of water possible. So one of the things we have not solved for this credit yet that we are still working on is the answer to the question, what happens if I don't have a cooling tower? How do I earn those points? The answer is right now you can't. We tried to find a solution prior to 6th public comment that tied this credit to the energy efficiency credit. So essentially, if you could show us that you were, you didn't need a cooling tower, but you were still being energy efficient, you weren't just avoiding a cooling tower by using more energy, that we were going to put a tie there, but we couldn't get the calculation quite simple enough. It was becoming a little bit too complex. So we've held off on putting that option in the rating system. Again, this is another spot where we expect to see an alternative compliance path over the next several months for projects to be able to earn these points if they can show that they are still energy efficient but not in need of a cooling tower. Finally, the water metering credit. Now the credit is in interior design and construction, even though the prerequisite is not. Here we are rewarding projects for sub-metering out at least 2 of their specific water end uses. So giving them the information necessary to better tie the design of their systems to how that space behaves in operation. And this is, what did I want to add here? The metering credit, again, is in BD&C and ID&C, and in EBOM, I believe it's actually worth a couple more points than 2 to further encourage that in the existing buildings rating system. So energy and atmosphere, this is the part of the rating system where you see the most number of points held for the credits in the system. That is because the credits in energy and atmosphere do the best job at addressing the impacts that LEED is about. So reducing a building's contribution to climate change being our top priority. This is where you find many of those credits. So again, we're looking first for buildings to achieve efficiency. I should have mentioned this for water as well. We want to reward water and energy, and I'll talk about in a minute materials efficiency first, and then rewarding projects for relying on other types of renewable energy. Same goes for water as well. So here we're starting to get a little bit more colorful with our graphics. And you'll see we have our arrows are starting to get a little bit more messy. So we've done some consolidation as it goes over to V4 and kind of rearranged some things around in the system. But what's important to keep in mind here and in some of the other categories, everything that you were rewarded for and that we addressed in LEED 2009 is somewhere over in V4. So To start with the fundamental commissioning and verification prerequisite, here we've expanded the scope of the commissioning process to include not just energy efficiency, but looking a little bit more holistically at indoor air quality as well as durability. So all three of those issues are very important to projects in terms of performance, and they're also oftentimes competing with each other. And so we want to make sure that projects are just balancing their analysis and consideration of those issues. We've also, the other notable change here, or clarification, I guess, one of the most common CIRs we see is explain to me what the commissioning authority can do in fundamental commissioning versus enhanced. So we've pulled all of those CIRs together and tried to be very clear in the system of who can do what as it pertains to the commissioning authority. And then we also have a requirement for preparing an operations and maintenance plan, with the idea that the commissioning process should help bridge that gap again from design to operations, so that the folks who are actually operating the building understand the components that went into it and how to appropriately manage them. What I would consider to be the most major change in the rating system from LEED 2009 to LEED version 4 are the changes to the minimum and optimized energy performance prerequisite and credit. We've switched our reference standard from ASHRAE 90.1 2007 to 2010. Not really a big change in terms of redlining the rating system, but in terms of what that means because of the changes that ASHRAE has made to their program. ASHRAE 90.1 2010 is about 20% more stringent than 2007. Many of the many of the provisions that projects tended to use to demonstrate efficiency beyond the old baseline are now part of ASHRAE's mandatory measures. For California projects, you'll see that Title 24 2013 very much mirrors ASHRAE 90.1 2010. So there's the same type of stringency increase based on how your code is changing. With the California-based beta projects, we've been looking at this very closely and found that there are, particularly with some requirements around receptacles, there's a lot of change in there. And so we're looking at one, how to determine equivalency to Title 24 2010, but also how to make sure that we're providing all of the right guidance around where ASHRAE has changed, how do projects better approach that and know kind of what they need to do and how their design might change based on some of those stringency issues. We've mitigated this at the prerequisite level in one way. We typically go 10% beyond the reference standard at the prerequisite level. LEED version 4 is only looking at 5%. So based on the analysis that we did, we made sure that that was impacting as few projects as possible. Then just some minor changes to the advanced energy design guides as well as the core performance guides. Building level energy metering, you'll see kind of grew out of the measurement and verification credits from LEED 2009. These, again, were complex credits that projects tended not to do because they were just confusing in their application. So we no longer reference the IPMVP protocol as part of M&V, and in the building design and construction rating systems, we're only really addressing the measurement portion and focusing on metering and setting the building up to understand their performance through getting the right type of information relevant to their energy use. So here we have at the prerequisite level, similar to water, a requirement for building level energy meters for each building that's on your site being part of certification. No substantive changes to the fundamental refrigerant management prerequisite. I'm going to say that one more time in this presentation, and then I'm going to quiz you on what those credits were. EA Credit 1, Enhanced Commissioning. We've adjusted the points here and added 2 new options to this credit. One for monitoring-based commissioning, which is really rewarding a technology that's grown significantly over the past several years. And then another option for envelope commissioning and encouraging projects to address envelope as part of their commissioning scope. So projects have the option of earning any one of those 3 options or earning all 3. for a total of 6 points. Again, we've clarified language here as it pertains to enhanced commissioning for who can play what role in terms of commissioning authority. Optimize energy performance in LEED V4 worth 18 points. Again, aside from the changes to the reference standard, relatively minor changes otherwise, updates to the advanced energy design guidelines as well as the core performance guide. Here, advanced energy metering, the way that this credit works is additional points for projects for sub-metering out any energy use that's projected to be more than 10% of the building's energy. So depending on how many of those you have will depend on how many sub-meters you need in order to earn the points. And then for core and shell projects, we've specified that in order to earn the points, they need to address future tenant spaces and provide the infrastructure in a way that they can be easily metered by the tenant. The demand response credit is a new concept in LEED version 4. And this is another area of the rating system where it's come out of a significant amount of work we've done with outside stakeholders, in this case, utilities from around the country. So the way that this credit works is projects earn points by enrolling in a local demand response program with their utility and committing to shaving at least 10% of their energy off, or their peak load energy off during peak intervals. If a project doesn't have a demand response program in their area, they can still earn a subset of these points by essentially making their building demand response capable and complying with and participating in an automated program, and then contacting their utility and essentially providing the demand for that type of program. So this is one of those credits where LEED really, where LEED's potential really kind of shines in terms of being able to accelerate the adoption of and availability of programs across the country and across the world related to, in this case, demand response. So we've been seeing a number of utilities around the country making these programs available. Many have been working with us and signing on to our demand response partnership program. So we do expect to see a lot more action in this arena in the coming months and years. Here for renewable energy production, we've adjusted the points here and then added a new option for community scale renewable energy systems. So in addition to being able to take credit for just what's available on your site for generated energy, if you are part of a community generated energy system, you can claim that as well. For enhanced refrigerant management, again, minor changes here. We've just added retail-specific requirements based on the LEED 2009 for retail program. And finally, green power and carbon offsets. You'll see a change in the title to reflect that we are now accepting carbon offsets for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. We've also adjusted the credit to be based on total building energy use as opposed to just electricity. And then we've adjusted the contract length or the commitment length from 2 years to 5 years and have a specific requirement that the resources must have come online after January 1st of 2005 to ensure that they are of the best technology. And then we are still relying on Green E here. All right. So materials and resources. This is the credit category in the rating system where there's been the most kind of chatter and concern about the changes here. So we made a very pretty graphic that represents the approach that we've taken to materials and resources in version 4. We call it a lifecycle thinking approach to building products and materials. And the reason we've taken a new approach to it is because what we found is the former approach in LEED 2009 and versions prior wasn't addressing our goal of actually helping projects be more material efficient. It wasn't rewarding project teams for using less material. It was rewarding projects for using enough recycled content or enough rapidly renewable material. It was encouraging purchasing things to meet the credits and not giving you points if you could show us you were doing more with less, which is what we ultimately want projects to do. So the approach that we take here, as I said, is called a lifecycle thinking approach. It starts with reuse, and reuse is most highly valued in the materials and resources section. So whether it's a building or other products and materials that are that you're reusing on site, we want to reward those most heavily. Knowing that projects can't reuse everything and that they're going to have to purchase things new, we want to encourage project teams to assess and optimize their decisions around new materials and products that they're bringing on site. So at the whole building level, you'll see this assessment and optimization rewarded through whole building lifecycle assessment tools. At the product level, you'll see it rewarded through the use of products with environmental product declarations on those products on the part of manufacturers. So LCA tools are great at helping us understand the environmental implications of developing a product. So going from a production process to create that table or this podium, we can relatively easily understand the environmental impacts like the global warming potential of that process, the eutrophication, acidification impacts. That's what LCA tools are really good at. They're not really good at addressing and helping us understand and quantify the human and ecological health impacts associated with those same processes. That's why you see credits in the system like what was the certified wood credit that has become the responsible sourcing of raw materials, and the material ingredient credit. That's also the box in the rating system that it's this little box in all of it that kind of is causing the most amount of concern and discussion on the part of a variety of organizations around the country, particularly trade associations impacted by those changes. Final step in the process, we want to encourage appropriate waste management. So as much as possible, we want project teams making this into a cycle as opposed to sending things to the landfill and kind of breaking the cycle. So sending things back for reuse or recycling, and again, being able to create a cycle out of this as opposed to a beginning and an end. So it's a really bad graphic, and I apologize. It's all red. It's kind of a simple story, but you'll see it kind of looks like a disaster from what you're used to. So again, one of the first things I want you to take note of is that what was in LEED 2009, everything you're used to is somewhere over here. It's been repackaged. And it's organized in a completely different way, but we do still reward projects for the things that you are used to being rewarded for, in addition to a number of new strategies that we reward you for. So first prerequisite, you are all familiar with this, storage and collection of recyclables. Minor changes here. We've added requirements for addressing battery waste, electronic waste, as well as mercury-containing lamps. And then for retail projects, we've maintained the option that exists for them in LEED 2009 for retail, where they can identify their top 4 waste streams and then provide recycling, storage, and collection for those top 4. We've added a new prerequisite for waste management planning. So this is just helping and encouraging project teams to consider and understand what their waste infrastructure is like around them. Is it possible to recycle? What are the possibilities based on where they're locating? And then setting targets for waste diversion for their project. It is not connected to performance requirements.
Chrissy, I have a question. Is
Yeah.
that construction waste or just ongoing waste?
It's construction waste for this credit. Or for this prerequisite, I'm sorry. So the first complicated graphic here, and I will note that we are looking at option level as opposed to credit level, just to help give everyone a better understanding of how the credit works. The first credit is called Building Lifecycle Impact Reduction. So this is where you're earning points for either reusing a building or, if you have a new building, completing a whole building lifecycle assessment. So option 3 is what you're most familiar with. If you're reusing a building, depending on the percent of that building that you're able to maintain, you earn up to 4 points. You can earn a bonus 5th point if you're pursuing options 1 or 2, which is essentially that building happens to be historic or an abandoned or blighted building. The reason we have extra reward here for that is because of the development constraints associated with those building types, as well as the economic and social benefits associated with reusing those particular types of buildings. So option 4, if you are just doing new construction, is the reward for 3 points for completing a whole building life cycle assessment. It's essentially a simple energy model from a materials perspective. So you're looking at trying to maintain the function of your building in a more material, but doing so in a more material efficient way. So potentially bringing in different materials, adjusting your design. We've seen a lot of case studies where projects can utilize up to 30% less material by going through this process. One of the best tools out there for project teams to engage with is the Athena calculator. You don't need a whole building life cycle assessment consultant to use it. It's geared toward people who are not experts in whole building LCA. So the idea here is that we're either rewarding projects for reuse or at the building level, rewarding projects for assessing their design and their function and optimizing their decisions around it.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Regarding historic buildings, how are they defined? Do you know?
It is defined by the National Historic Register, or depending on if you're outside the US, it would be whatever that equivalent is to the body who would say, who designates buildings as historic.
Because it's around 50 years, I mean, at least in
Yes.
California.
Mm-hmm.
I know, I mean, there are particular regulations
Mhm.
to those buildings.
Right.
Specifically that they should not be modified in any way, because
Right.
otherwise they would, cause particular type of impacts and
Mm-hmm.
cause
Right,
some
exactly.
reaction. So I'm not really sure how would that work in that case.
So essentially, we do have a lot of, there is actually a lot of work going on with LEED and different preservation organizations to kind of marry that issue of the intersection between historic buildings and LEED and any type of historic preservation and how that works. And so this is one way where we wanted to provide extra incentive for project teams to consider historic buildings as an option for them, knowing that there are so many benefits, one with building reuse, but then also with historic buildings, just where they tend to be located, or just the attributes about them that make them valuable to the preservation community also has a lot of overlap with things that are valuable to the environmental community. So essentially the way that the option works is depending on how much of the building you're able to preserve, you would earn up to all 5 of those points. Mm-hmm.
Did that get relocated out of the regional priority credit?
So many of the chapters have selected this as a regional priority credit, or they've selected I believe it's in high priority site, is locating in a historic district is also in there in the location and transportation section. So many projects will find that based on the chapter that they're in, this may be an option where a regional priority credit, there's another bonus regional priority credit.
So another credit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the next 3 credits I'm going to talk about are in a series called Building Product Disclosure and Optimization Credits. So here we are looking at products as opposed to building level. So the first credit in this series is called Environmental Product Declarations. So we're still, again, looking at that, thinking about that box for assessment and optimization, thinking about environmental impact here. So the way that these options, or the way that these credits work, they're divided into 2 options. The first option is focused on rewarding disclosure-based activities. So the idea that information is valuable to have. The same principles for why we reward using metering. It's really good to know how much energy you're using, even if you're using a lot more energy than you thought you were. It's actually really important to know that. The same is true here. It's really important for manufacturers for us to reward manufacturers and reward project teams for selecting products from manufacturers where they have told us and given us information about the environmental impacts of their process of developing this podium. Even if the information they're telling us, we're realizing is that it's really poor, and that there's a lot of environmental impacts and that they're a lot maybe worse than we expected, it's still worthwhile to have that information. The reason it's worthwhile is option 2 of all of these credits that rewards the selection of materials where the environmental product declaration has led to an improvement of those impacts. So the manufacturer has actually gone through a process to review those environmental impacts and reduce them and change their process to still get this podium, but in a more efficient way or in a less environmentally destructive way. So the way that project teams will engage with this, they will see environmental product declarations on products, and manufacturers will be communicating in what ways they are compliant with these products and with these processes, and USGBC will kind of be maintaining lists of compliant manufacturers. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a percentage of products that need to meet that requirement? Do you list all of them, or?
So the way that it works for option 1, it's based on a product number approach. So it's 20 products from at least 5 different manufacturers. And we chose 20 because in LEED 2009, in order to document, say, the recycled content credit, project teams typically document between 60 and 70 different products to into the different materials calculators to meet those different thresholds. So 20 is based on the couple of different ways that we value EPDs, knowing that some projects may need more than 20, also recognizing that there are fewer EPDs in the market than products with recycled content, and also we want to encourage project teams to try to reach that threshold.
The EPDs, will there be some guidance to manufacturers? This is going to be Sanskrit to most of them. Mm-hmm. This is totally out of their language.
Yeah, so we've been doing, at least over the last year, and what we'll very intensely start to focus on in the summer is the outreach to manufacturers. We have a number of manufacturers who we've been working with that the way that they're engaging with this is they're planning what they bring to Greenbuild this year as kind of their debut of a lot of these tools that they've engaged with. And we also have what we're kind of informally referring to as the LEED version 4 readiness program for manufacturers, which sounds like something, I don't like the name because it sounds like something the Red Cross should have for disaster relief. And I don't want people thinking, oh, LEED V4 is a disaster, great, we need to get ready. So I'm not happy with what we're calling it. But essentially it's targeted at manufacturers to help them understand, you know, now that we're nearing ballot, our requirements are set, what do you need to do to get ready for it?
Yeah, because we're going to be asking them.
Exactly, yeah. And what we've been finding, especially with beta projects, is and even projects that may be starting in a year but are starting very early in their process, we've had manufacturers contacting us saying, there's different firms contacting me, asking me what I'm doing, which is great from our perspective. It means manufacturers aren't just hearing it from us, they're hearing it from the market saying, oh, we know this is coming, we want to use this system, so do this. So you can, in all of these credits, you can include furniture if you want to. You just need to apply it consistently. The same is true with MEP. You can include it if you want to, as long as you do for all 3 of these credits that I'm going to talk about. So the next credit, here we're now moving into that box of human and ecological health impacts, is the sourcing of raw materials credit. So here we are looking at the certified wood credit applied to mining, extraction, quarrying, any type of extraction related industry or supplier. So again, option 1 is looking at disclosure. So we want manufacturers and suppliers reporting on issues related to extraction through reporting frameworks. So here it's their supplier locations, their labor practices, their land use practices, anything that has to do with actually taking the materials, the virgin materials out of the ground and getting ready to put them through a product development process. As was mentioned, FSC is the one reference standard that you're used to seeing in the LEED rating system. The hope is to be able to add additional reference standards for mining, for quarrying, and additionally address those different sectors as well. Just a quick story I'll tell. So if you were paying close attention about a year ago, in this credit we referenced the Framework for Responsible Mining, which is a great standard for best practices for the mining industry. And we found it, we read through it, it was great, it met the intent of what we were doing. And then after we put it out for comment, we did a little bit more research on it and wanted to actually start working with those verifiers to say, you know, we've referenced you, you're going to see a lot more suppliers coming through for verification. And what we found when we were looking for it is that the Framework for Responsible Mining was developed by like one guy in his spare time. And it was great and it was brilliant, and it was just a couple of volunteers with him who had sat down and hammered this out. And it was kind of like we were telling him that they were winning the lottery in the worst way possible. So it was like, oh, we're referencing you in LEED. There's going to be thousands of suppliers who want you to verify their processes. And it's like, no, we're not ready. Thank you, but no, we're not ready for this. So the Framework for Responsible Mining is something that you're likely to see in the future, referenced here once the verification part of the industry is stood up and ready to kind of engage with the market at that level. So there's a lot of standards out there where USGBC is actively working on helping them to verify at the level that they'll see by being referenced in LEED. Yeah, go ahead.
What about SFI?
So, thank you for asking that question. We don't currently reference SFI or any other wood certification system. We put that measure out to ballot in 2010 to our membership. We created a framework that essentially would explore all wood certification systems and rate them based on the extent to which they addressed certain indicators that had to do with chain of custody. Our membership voted it down. So what our membership did was essentially vote that down and leave us with only referencing FSC. So we have not changed that in LEED version 4 because that ballot initiative happened and failed in 2010 after we had already started our version 4 development process. And so we haven't changed that reference, but it's something where we are definitely, we're in kind of an unfortunate situation because there are, the wood industry is certainly far more sophisticated than other parts of the extraction industry. And there's a number of different certification systems that we simply don't reference because our membership voted for they made a different decision than we put out to them. So that is the background on why we only reference FSC. So the final credit in this series is called Material Ingredients in this Building Product Disclosure and Optimization series. So here, again, we're still in that human and ecological health box. This time, disclosure is relevant to the chemical ingredients in our products and materials. And we want to encourage manufacturers to report on that. There's a number of programs out there that collect this information and value those products based on what the chemical makeup of their products are. So again, option 1, if a product manufacturer is disclosing what's actually in this podium, we want to reward project teams for using this product. For option 2, we want to reward manufacturers who improve their performance, not performance of the product's function itself, but performance as it relates to human and ecological health criteria. So for example, if this podium was made of plutonium, which it's not, but if it were, and by taking it out, it would make this podium floppy instead of structured, the product would not meet its function. So there's a reason to keep that material in there. So we're not looking at saying, make changes that would make this podium into something that's not a podium. We're saying, you know, if there are ways that, if there are programs out there that help manufacturers to understand what may be better materials, ingredients to go into their products, we want to encourage that dialogue. So we reference programs here like Health Product Declaration, which is a manufacturer-driven declaration process. Cradle to Cradle, which allows for product manufacturers to supply their material ingredient information. And then depending on what is in there and the evaluation that Cradle to Cradle does, the products are essentially given a certification level. So there's a lot of different ways that project teams can look for products that comply here based on the programs that are referenced. All right, we're back to credits that you all recognize. Construction waste management here. We've added an option for having a waste reduction strategy and actually staying under a certain pounds per square foot of waste produced. And the major change I think we've made here is that alternative daily cover is no longer considered a diverted waste. It's considered waste, and so that will be, I think, the biggest change for many projects with how they meet those thresholds. In the EQ category, we've done some reorganization with the category to more clearly articulate the goals of improved occupant experience and productivity around issues of indoor air, light, sound, and occupant experience. So this is a category where I personally think it looks a lot better in version 4. It's extremely long on the other side, and we've done some consolidation, like I said, around these key areas to have a little bit more intuitive credits. So starting with EQ Prerequisite 1, Minimum Indoor Air Quality Performance. Here we've shifted the reference standard from ASHRAE 62.1 2007 to 2010. We've also added some requirements at the prerequisite level for outdoor air delivery monitoring. And then on the existing building side, we are testing a pilot prerequisite that is a performance-based approach to this prereq. So currently EBOM projects are stuck with a design-based reference standard that doesn't fit a lot of projects. So we are trying to figure out through the pilot credit library how that performance approach would work, with the idea that that option would be added to LEED version 4 as well as LEED 2009 once we get that to kind of a stable place. For the environmental tobacco smoke control credit, we have prohibited smoking in all LEED buildings except residential. And then for residential projects, we've reduced the maximum leakage rates allowed for compartmentalized units. And then for schools projects on both the new and existing side, smoking is prohibited anywhere on the site, not just in the building. The first credit is a consolidation of a couple of the indoor air based credits, now called Enhanced Indoor Air Quality Strategies. So here we've added additional options for mathematical modeling, additional sensors, as well as mixed mode systems. We've also set the credit up in a way where the project team can earn an initial point by doing one of the indoor air quality strategies, and then earn a second point by implementing additional strategies, but a little bit more flexibility in terms of what the project team's choosing that makes the most sense for their project. The low emitting materials credit, is a consolidation of several credits that you're all familiar with from 2009. We used to give a point for low VOC paint, a point for low VOC furniture and furnishings, flooring, ceiling tiles. We're now taking a systems-based approach to this credit to make it more performance-based and much more tied to how the products behave in a space from a VOC perspective. So we're looking at VOC emissions as opposed to VOC content. And we want project teams considering all of what they're bringing into the space together. So not just low VOC paint, but everything else is really high VOC. Are we really improving the indoor air quality? Probably not. And so the way that this works, there are two options for the credit. One is a chamber testing method of the system. The other is a calculation method based on you essentially get a total VOC budget for your space, and depending on what percent of the space comes in under that total VOC budget, you can earn up to 3 points for the credit. No substantive changes to the construction indoor air quality management plan credit. What was the other one? Who remembers?
Refrigerant.
Yes. Sorry, I only said that twice. I apologize. The next credit, indoor air quality assessment. We still have the option for the flush out here, and we've added a second option, again, more performance-based, rewarding projects for air testing. So there's additional contaminants for what project teams are testing under that option too. And we, again, want to make that performance-based option worth more points than the flush out, which is not as accurate or not as tied to occupant health outcomes as testing and really understanding what contaminants are in the space. For thermal comfort, we've updated the reference standard here from ASHRAE 55 2007 to 2010. We've also removed these requirements for core and shell since it's really more applicable in the tenant space. For interior lighting, we have some new requirements in here that address lighting quality. So we've addressed stringency in that way with these credits and also adjusted the points here. For daylight, this is one of those credits again where LEED project teams tend to comply with it but don't want to show us that they comply with it because it's complicated to tell us. So we've made a number of changes here and have been working with a number of daylight modeling software companies to ensure that our requirements are in line with what their tools are doing, so that for our documentation we've essentially been able to remove the post-processing associated with the daylight modeling, making it much more usable for project teams. Quality views, and thanks for staying with me, we're almost at the end. We've added requirements around quality of the view that the project has. So for those of you familiar with the exemplary performance criteria from 2009, that's been moved up into the regular credit language. So again, looking at qualitative measures for what the occupants are experiencing. Finally, last but not least, a new credit for acoustic performance. This is based off feedback we received from the very first engagement point we had with LEED version 4. Back in 2009, we had a call for ideas. More than anything else, our stakeholders said, please address acoustics in the commercial office application. It's not acoustics is not great in LEED spaces. It's certainly true of USGBC headquarters. That's a LEED 2009 platinum space. Our acoustics are not great. So we want to provide the incentive for project teams to consider this in their space. Acoustics have a huge impact on occupant productivity. And so we've addressed it previously in schools and healthcare. We continue to do that, but now also address it in the building design and interior design and construction systems. So just touching on the LEED version 4 beta, as I mentioned, we do have just over 90 projects as of yesterday working on their certification toward LEED version 4 alongside USGBC and GBCI staff. Right now we're limited to 100 projects, but we are looking to expand the number of projects that we invite into the program. So essentially the way that this works, you register for the program, you are assigned a point of contact from USGBC, who is the staff member whose name, face, email address, phone number you know, and you call or email for whatever questions you have with the program. So that person takes care of figuring out who needs to solve your issue, who needs to maybe get on the phone with you or with your project team, and in very short order answers your technical questions. I am responsible on this project for essentially our stakeholder and project team experience with this program and also with recruitment. On the screen is my email address. If you have a project that you think might be a good fit, we're inviting projects from all of our rating systems that LEED version 4 supports into this program. In 2013, that's the primary time we're collecting feedback from the project teams on our reference guide, our forms, their overall certification experience, and then with the goal of employing as many of those feedback points as possible into the rest of the program. So when we launch at Greenbuild, it's a very much improved program that's based on market feedback. So we've already gotten a whole lot of feedback through the process, and we'll continue to get that and feed it back into the system throughout the summer and fall. So if your project is active in the year 2013, if they're using the reference guide, starting to document credits through the forms, that's a great project. We want a project that's at a position where they're asking questions, they're running into challenges, because every question we get, we also ask ourselves, okay, would we expect that the project team should be able to find this answer in the reference guide? Okay, is it in the reference guide? If it's not, we know we need to add a paragraph or a sentence. If it is, we want to make sure that it's clearly accessible to the project and that they're seeing it and understanding the way we're communicating it. So it's already served as a great vehicle for improvements to the system, and we're happy to invite more projects. Last thing I'll say, again, I mentioned at the beginning, this is a very important time in terms of voter registration. If you are employed by a USGBC national member company, you have until April 30th to register to vote at the site at the bottom, new.usgbc.org/ballot. Sign into your site user account and check a box that says you want to vote. You'll have access to a 10-part webcast series exclusively for the voting body. That's an in-depth walkthrough of all of the LEED version 4 programs, including EBOM, residential, a sneak peek at the forms, reference guide, as well as webcasts specifically from our beta projects, giving you guys a first glance at their experience using the system.
It's still one vote per member company.
One vote per company. So multiple people can register to vote from a company. It's then calculated proportionally if more people want to vote, but it's up to the company how they want to structure that. So, any other questions before we wrap up? Thank you for hanging in through that. Yeah?
So overall, I just want to get to the punchline. How much more stringent is the new version versus the old version?
So we did an analysis of our, we took all of our LEED 2009 projects and looked at their credit achievement to find essentially the average project. So what we found is, on average, a project team is earning, I think, around 58 points, including innovation and regional priority credits, and then looked at what the most commonly achieved credits are that they're likely to achieve as a typical project. Based on that, and then looking at how those credits have changed, the most commonly sought after credits by the average project, it changes by about a certification level, depending on where in the country you are. So in a lot of cases, as we expected, the energy change is the big one, where the 20% change in the baseline kind of takes a number of points away from projects where they tend to be earning a lot. Another place is actually some of the EQ credits, where projects typically earn those. They haven't necessarily changed a lot, but the way that they're structured has changed the total number of points that a project might earn. Even though the materials and resources credits are the most different, the average project doesn't actually earn most of those credits. They're for a number of reasons. One, because they're complex to document, but also simply because of a lot of the 2009 materials credits don't work in a lot of ways. So on average, we expect about a certification level, but we've also had a number of firms working with us doing project. They've been looking at a specific project and then seeing what that one project as a case study would earn in version 4. And we've been seeing very different results as well. So a lot of it's a very imperfect analysis based on a lot of assumptions. So on average, we expect about 10 points different. Other questions? Yeah.
When does it actually do the launch?
We are launching at Greenbuild of 2013. LEED 2009 is open for registration until June 1st of 2015. So we have about a year and a half where we expect that project teams will choose whether they want to use LEED version 3 or version 4. We expect that a lot of firms will slowly start adopting version 4, you know, maybe the first year do a couple of projects, a couple more the next year, to really learn the system. So by 2015, toward the end of the year, they're in a position where it can be the only system that they're regularly using. So the exams are in the process of changing. So the LEED version 4 team in April, we've nearly completed our assessment of all 2,100 or so questions that are part of all of the different LEED exams to see what questions, how many of them are now irrelevant or invalid because of LEED version 4, how many of them need just a minor tweaking to still be relevant. The idea is that we are not launching a LEED version 4 credential. We want to simply update the test to take into account the new concepts in version 4. The way testing protocol development works outside the scope of USGBC, there's usually 2 methods for incorporating new content into tests. One is to have a certain percentage of the test be questions that you're actually testing their validity. So like when you take the SATs or the GMAT or something, some portion of that test isn't counting toward your score. The test developers are literally seeing what's the achievement like for this question. If everyone's getting it right or if everyone's getting it wrong, there's something wrong with the question. So since we expect that there's a fairly significant number of questions that we'll need to make modifications to, we're probably not going to use that method because it would take too long to do those validity assessments. So what we're expecting to do at Greenbuild of this year is launch beta versions of a new exam where essentially the same way it's working for projects, you have the option to keep registering and taking the same test that's out there, or you can opt into the updated version of the test to help us test entire blocks of questions. So every question you're seeing is a test question, is a question that we're testing, so that we can go through that process faster and reach an understanding of the validity of the questions faster. So we expect to have the beta versions of those exams. Again, if you take the test and you pass, you earn your credential. It's a valid credential path. And then the education that we're launching, we will have exam prep as well. And in terms of maintenance, there will be education out there that's V4 related, so it'll just sort of naturally flow into how you'll maintain your credential as well. You can continue to use V3 specific education, or start to learn about version 4 kind of at your own pace. All right, well, thank you all for staying with me and going through all of this content. Please email me if you have questions that you think of, or if you have a beta project. Thank you.